Hello and welcome back to the Unthinkable. Today's story takes us to a place known as the heart of the arts, Moscow, Idaho, in what I believe is one of the most bizarre cases I've covered on this channel. When you hear the details of this story, you may also ask yourself how something like this could happen the way it has been described. So sit back, grab a snack, and delve into a strange and odd retelling of a serial murder with me, as we dig into the many details of this case. Known for its arts and music festivals, including the Renaissance Fair and Pritchard Art Gallery, Idaho is full of art. It's full of music and dance culture, with Moscow having been rated as one of the top 100 small art towns in America. But on November 13th of 2022, the small town of Moscow, Idaho, that has a rough population of about 27,000 citizens, will become the center of news articles and headlines across America for something other than its rich history of art. Around 11:58 a.m. that morning, a call phones into the 911 operators that reports, quote, an unconscious individual. Once police reach the location of where the call originated, they find not one unresponsive individual, but four. And by the time they're able to survey the entire scene with their own eyes, it becomes very clear to them that these individuals aren't merely unconscious. They're deceased. And this wasn't an accident. It was cold-blooded murder. So they take the necessary actions required to rope off the scene and begin their extensive investigation into exactly what had taken place just hours earlier. The murders included Kaylee Goncalves, age 21, and Madison Mogan, also age 21. Both were seniors set to graduate from the University of Idaho this year. The two young ladies met years ago in the 6th grade, and Kaylee's father said that they'd been inseparable ever since. They did homework together, they visited relatives together, searched out colleges together, and they shared everything, including the apartment in which they eventually moved into together. They were even found at the scene, in the same room, in the same bed, together, sharing their last moments of living this life together. Also found there in the 3-story home was 20-year-old Zaina Kernodle and her boyfriend at the time, Ethan Chapin, who had begun dating one another just months before their murders. All 4 victims had been butchered to death in their sleep, investigators believe. What makes this story and murder scene strange and almost unbelievable are the details that investigators learned once they arrived on scene. Apparently, the 4 victims weren't the only ones who'd been in the 3-story home the night the murders took place. There were not 1, but 2 other surviving roommates inside of the home that night. Bethany Funke and Dylan Mortensen, who were both on the 2nd floor where Ethan and his girlfriend Zaina were killed. And what investigators would find even more striking is that Dylan had a story to tell. She had come face to face with the killer the night of the attack. The following is the personal recounting of Dylan Mortensen. She said that she'd gone to sleep in her bedroom on the 2nd floor of the 3-story home, the very same floor, once again, that Zaina and Ethan were found deceased. But that she was awakened in the middle of the night by what sounded like Kaylee playing with her dog in one of the 3rd floor bedrooms above her. Dylan gets up and walks to her door and opens it for the first time to look out into the opening of the kitchen, but sees nothing. So she closes her door and goes back to her bed. But just minutes later, she hears what sounds like crying coming from Zaina and Ethan's room, and so she opens her door for a 2nd time to look out. It's at this point that she says she hears a man's voice respond saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Apparently, she still did not take any sort of action in the moment and closed her door, only to open it for a 3rd time just a few minutes after to see a figure in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. As she stood frozen and in shock in her doorway, she states that the man turns, walking past her, and exits out of the kitchen sliding door entrance. After which, she locks herself inside of her room. And here is where many people have a problem with her story and how she says it happened. They also have a problem with how she reacted after witnessing something so horrifying, because as it turned out, despite her personal close encounter with death, she doesn't make a call to 911 until almost noon, an entire 8 hours later. And obviously, people have questions, such as what in the world was she doing in that time span? Why did it take a full work shift for her to contact the authorities? Why did the killer walk right past her and choose to spare her life? So many questions with very little in the way of answers remained after her testimony. And right now, I'm going to show you a virtual layout of the home and the events that happened that night in order to provide a bit more clarity as well as a visual timeline to give you all an idea of how this went down. Credit to these TikTokers who put together very short form videos on this case to provide us all with these visuals.
In the beginning, most of us believed the two surviving roommates, Bethany and Dylan, were sleeping on the first floor. Since then, we've learned Dylan was sleeping here on the second floor, along with Xana and Ethan located here. Kaylee and Madison were located here on the third floor. The dog was located on the third floor and the room by itself. Let's move around and see through the walls, into the kitchen, to the back slider, and take a look at the time frames. At 4:04 a.m., the suspect can be seen trying to park his car. At 4:09, approximately 5 minutes later, he enters the house through the back slider. At 4:18, he leaves the house after committing the crimes. At 4:20, he's caught on camera driving away at a high rate of speed. All of this only took 9 minutes. Let's watch what that looks like. The suspect enters through the back sliding door. He pauses at the stairs to look around and make sure no one's up. He then turns and goes upstairs. The first bedroom he stops at and opens the door, he sees no one there. He continues to the next bedroom. Here we know what happens. Downstairs, Dylan is sleeping. The noise from upstairs wakes her up. She thinks it's Kaylee playing with her dog. She gets up and goes to the door and looks out. She sees nothing there. The suspect then continues down the stairs about 3 minutes later. He then heads to Xana's room. Outside there's a security camera picking up some whimpering, cries, and a thud at 4:17. We've learned that Xana was found on the floor, which might explain the thud. Dylan again hears something and looks outside her door. She sees the suspect. He walks right past her and leaves.
Leaving Pullman, heading toward Moscow. That's about a 15-minute drive. That same Elantra was picked up again at 3:26 a.m. heading west on Indian Hills Drive. Then 2 minutes later, heading west on Steiner at Highway 95. Starting at 3:29, the Elantra was seen passing the house on King Road where the murders happened 3 times. At 4:04, the Elantra turned around at a nearby apartment complex before going back and making a 3-point turn onto Queen Road. 16 minutes later, at 4:20, Koberger's white Elantra is seen on camera speeding away from the area, heading south. About an hour later, at 5:25, several traffic cameras in Pullman and on the Washington State University campus capture the Elantra returning. 12 days later, on November 25th, the Moscow Police Department asked area law enforcement to look for a white Hyundai Elantra. Then, on November 29th, WSU police found a 2015 Hyundai Elantra registered to a student, 28-year-old Brian Koberger, a graduate student studying criminology. His car was found about a half hour later at his WSU apartment complex in Pullman. His driver's license picture and information also matched the roommate's description of the man she saw in the house the morning of the murders. That pushed Moscow police to look into Koberger's cell phone data, a number they got after pulling him over for a traffic violation back in August, before the murders. At 2:42 a.m. on November 13th, Koberger's phone pinged at his apartment in Pullman. 5 minutes later, that phone left the apartment, traveling south through Pullman before it's turned off at 2:47. The phone doesn't ping again until 4:48 on Highway 95 south of Moscow, near Blaine. It pings at several cell towers before 4:50 and 5:26 a.m. showing it traveled south on 95 to Genesee, then west to Uniontown, and then north back to Pullman, where a traffic camera picked him up on Stadium Drive at 5:27.
We know that the killer was not walking straight at her because there's literally an oven across from her bedroom. So he either came down the stairs from her left or from the living room on her right. If he came down the stairs from her left, this is her bedroom door open, he would have hung a really sharp left and exited those sliding glass doors, which means she never would have really been in his direct eyesight. Same argument can be made if he came from the right side of her door, which is the living room, which is connected to where Xana and Ethan were found. If he comes from the right side of her door from the living room, he's still going to make that 90-degree turn and head straight out those sliding glass doors, not necessarily putting her in his eye line.
So eventually investigators are able to track down the vehicle of who they believe is the killer through various surveillance cameras in and around the area of the crime. CCTV, turns out, isn't the only evidence they're able to collect. The knife that was used to commit these murders, till this day, has never been found. However, a brown-colored K-bar sheath was left aside the bodies of Xana and Ethan. This particular knife was popular in the military as soldiers' preferred choice of a utility knife. This had led many investigators to surmise that the killer deliberately left it at the scene in order to lead investigators and detectives towards the belief that the murders were possibly committed by someone in the military. According to the police, it could be the reason why their suspect Brian Koberger, upon being arrested, asked them directly who else they had in custody as a suspect. But there are so many odd circumstances in this case from my point of view. Like, why did Brian allow the two other roommates to live? Was it a case of him being panicked and simply didn't notice Dylan standing right there in the doorway as he walked past? How was Dylan able to identify, quote, bushy eyebrows on the killer in the darkness? And above all else, everyone seems to have the same question of why these 4 students? Why that house? Was it a crime of opportunity? Was this planned beforehand? Was there a connection that investigators still haven't discovered? As far as anyone knew, Brian Koberger was just a normal guy. In fact, you could say that he was quite unremarkable. He was a criminal justice major that attended Washington State University and lived just 15 minutes from the victims just over the Idaho-Washington border in Pullman, having moved there just months earlier in August of 2022. Was this really just a random opportunity of cold-blooded murder? Despite some beliefs that the attack was sexually motivated, there has been zero evidence shown or found to support such a motive. And perhaps most bizarre is that Brian was pulled over on the highway at least twice, once while traveling with his father even, just weeks before the murders for traffic violations, but was allowed to continue on his way with simple warnings. The trial is set to take place in the summer of 2024, but many believe that prosecutors will have a difficult time making any type of connection or motive between Brian and his alleged victims. Many believe that the evidence is all circumstantial. One of the most difficult hurdles that investigators faced with this case in the beginning is the fact that the house these students lived in was known as the party house, meaning that there were several DNA profiles all over the place, so weeding out suspects was never going to be an easy process. But investigators say that the digital footprint of Brian's movements tracked through his cell phone the night of the murders paints a clear picture of his activity and his whereabouts that night. In addition to the CCTV footage, investigators say that they recovered a sheath from the trash of his parents' home that has his DNA profile on it near the clasping of the strap. A forensic technique that many law enforcement investigators have begun to use called genetic genealogy, which is the use of DNA testing conducted to determine any relationships between individuals, genetic matches, and ancestry in relation to the DNA profile of a suspect. And investigators say that the DNA pulled from the sheath has a match to the son of Brian's parents with a 99.9% genetic match. As this case goes forward, I'm left to ponder my own thoughts and questions about this story. What would make a criminology major student suddenly go on a murder spree? Was he studying criminology in order to be adept at getting away with murder in the future? How did he choose that house and on that night? Why did he drive past it so many times before deciding to make his move? Was he surveying the house for movement? How was he able to gain entry so easily? Was the sliding door open? Questions that we may never get the answers to. Either way, this will be a story that I'll be keeping my eyes on as time moves on, and to the families, friends, and above all, the students who lost their lives early in the morning of November the 13th, we give our deepest condolences and hope for some measure of peace as the seasons and years change. May their souls rest in peace and their killer be brought to justice.